Okay, well, thanks, Jan. So that photo on the left is my two sons. Carl's actually the one on the left at the back, and that's Jules on the right. And it's them leaving the Griffin Centre after Carl and Jules did the radio show together. Carl does a regular weekly 1 hour radio show, and his usual co-host was away, so Jules stepped in. And that's Carl in the station on air, and that's his buddy Max, whose back you can see. And then the photo above is Carl at work with his filmmaking mentor, Daniel. So to start with, I'll take you back to where our family was in 2013. I would say that we were afloat but drifting. So Carl, who's on the autism spectrum, was in year 10, and he was at high school and sort of in a semi-segregated situation that was promising effective individualised education, but it wasn't really working all that well. He was also in the midst of 12 months of illness because of gut problems, so he actually wasn't getting to school very much anyways, so he was too unwell. And I'd committed an enormous amount of time and energy to assisting Autism Asperger ACT to get a health and fitness grant to develop health and fitness programs, especially for people on the autism spectrum. And I sort of did that in the hope of developing some more things that Carl could participate in. And he did get involved with an Aikido, autism-specific Aikido class, and really enjoyed it. But even at that time in 2013, he was too unwell to get there. So at the time it was really hard to think ahead about the future, not just because Carl was so unwell, but also, you know, just didn't seem like there were a lot of things out there for people on the autism spectrum once they finished school. And even what was there didn't seem like a very good fit. So anyways, back in around August 2013, Jan actually organised for some families, including Jodie's family, to go down to Melbourne for the Belonging Matters conference. And for me, that was a real watershed experience. It completely changed my thinking, and for the better. Belonging Matters is a similar organisation to Imagine More. It has a similar mission and vision, and at the conference I listened to people with a disability and family members present their stories of how they had created these wonderful lives for the person with a disability. These were lives that were just really abundant in all those good things that we talked about earlier. There were 4 things that really struck me from the conference, and firstly was just how typical these people's lives looked. You know, they were happening in typical places in the community. So, you know, they were going to their school formal. You know, they were going out with work colleagues. You know, they were living in shared households, things like that. Secondly, they didn't have the kind of more, you know, token roles that often are assigned to people with a disability. You know, they weren't doing lots of activities. They were doing, they had these very genuine, valued roles in their community, and that really embedded them in their community. So the third thing was that I realised that virtually none of the really good things that were happening in their lives had been achieved or even could be achieved through special programs and traditional disability support services. They were really the result of very careful planning that had taken place around the strengths and the individual aspirations of those people, not, you know, the impact of their disability. And those people were supported in very subtle and very individually tailored ways. And I think, you know, it would be very hard for most service providers to be able to work in that way. And, you know, really most liberating of all for me was that I realised I didn't have to get a grant and build a whole program, you know, to create something good for Carl. You know, I could just focus on his aspirations, and we could build our own sort of post-school options from there. So yeah, these stories really illustrated the power of a clear vision, and there's some really great digital stories on the Belonging Matters website that are worth having a look at. These people, they really knew what they were striving for, and they knew what they needed to, get to make it happen. So, if the thing that they were looking for is what didn't exist, then they kind of found a way of building it and improvising. Their clear vision also really helped them to spot opportunities that just came their way, and it also really showed them what to say yes to and what to say no to. So, and having a positive vision also often inspired other people to get involved in the life of a person with a disability and be part of those good things that were happening. So I came away from the conference, realising that our family needed to develop a strong vision so that, we were actually steering the boat, not just staying afloat. And, I knew with a strong vision that we could do good things for Carl. So, after the conference, I just came home with a head full of ideas, and my poor husband, I think I chewed his ear off literally for the next 3 days because, I had just been so impressed by what I'd seen. I had lots of ideas about things that Carl could be doing, but I realised that my vision was not necessarily his vision, and that became apparent particularly when I started to talk to him about things relating to exercise and physical fitness. He wasn't that interested. So I knew that in the long term, Carl would have to have authorship of that vision, in order for it to lead to really meaningful outcomes for him. Initially, I wasn't actually able to engage him in the process. It was actually, it was understandably very difficult for him to think ahead, because, he was quite anxious about the future, having been sick and missed so much school. So, in fact, we didn't end up getting very far with the written vision until really about the middle of last year, to be honest. So that was a good 3 years that took. But look, in the meantime, I got by with a vision that was based on 3 simple default settings. So, we want Carl to attain the good things in life. We want Carl to have valued roles and the benefits that come from them. And, we want Carl to have access to the same kinds of opportunities that would be available to any other young person, in Canberra who has similar aspirations and interests. And, I just realised, there was no good reason to aspire to anything less. So initially our vision, it was more detailed than what's now sort of the preamble to vision. So that's really the kind of underlying thinking behind our vision. So I also started to think about what we would need to act on a vision, because there's no point in having a vision and not doing anything. So this kind of vision really meant that we needed to venture back into the regular community and try new things. And for people on the autism spectrum, that can actually be quite fraught, especially if they experience significant anxiety, as Carl does. But we knew that we would need people who could be kind of trusted guides for him, and help him successfully navigate into new situations and new roles. We've been lucky in the past, sometimes to come across people like that just in the community. who'd sort of intuitively taken on that kind of role with Carl. And those kind of people didn't really necessarily have autism training or need it. They just realised they just needed the following qualities. They needed some, patience to take some time to build a rapport with Carl, and sometimes just give him a bit of extra time to get comfortable with something. They needed a good degree of emotional intelligence so that they could keep things positive and Carl would trust them. And they also needed flexibility, just to be able to sometimes adjust the environment so that it was close enough to Carl's comfort zone that it was challenging, because you never grow without challenge, but not overwhelming. So when we had our first NDIS meeting, I knew that we needed to ask for funding for these trusted guides or mentors, which is also the word that I use, because I think that's a better term. I also knew that we were going to need to self-manage our funding, in order to be able to employ those sort of people who are right for the role, and to find those people in the kind of, general community spaces where we wanted to get Carl involved. So, I felt, if we could draw on people from across the whole community, we had a much better chance than if we just had to choose from people from service providers. So we were very fortunate that our planner listened, and we had a really significant chunk of funding in our plan for mentoring. So I didn't know exactly what we were going to use it for, but we had the funds there for when the time came. So at the start of 2014, Carl was well enough to get back to school, and he started Year 11 at Canberra College. And it was a huge challenge for him to overcome that impact of missing a whole year of school, and it was a real hard slog to get right through to the end of Year 12. But he really enjoyed being back in the mainstream, and he was very engaged by a lot of what he was learning, particularly in English and media, and he discovered the writing of the gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson and really connected with that. He also had a number of really great teachers, and they were really encouraging. And a particular standout, a teacher called Elena Kamezis, who was his media teacher, and Elena encouraged Carl to get involved in a radio program that was run by students from Canberra College and Narrabundah College. It was a big step for him, but again, she was one of those people who was, a bridge into this new thing, and it was the start of an ongoing passion for him with radio. So not long after we got our NDIS funding, we had our first opportunity to use it, and it happened when Elena is actually encouraging Carl to become more involved in the station as a volunteer. So I liked the idea of that, but I wanted to make sure it was going to be something worthwhile. So we discussed it with school and with the radio station, and we were really fortunate in that actually Sophie, the manager of the station, was also very committed to making this something that was worthwhile, and it turned into an internship at the radio station, and we were able to say to the radio station that we had some NDIS funding that we could use for a bit of extra staff time to help Carl, transition into the environment and learn some useful skills. And they actually had a trainer at the station that they used who they also thought would be a really good fit for Carl. So, it was really helpful to them that we could cover that cost with our NDIS funding. So, everything just came together beautifully for that. And the end result for Carl was a really transformative experience. So, Jenny was a fantastic mentor for Carl, and he came out of that experience. She taught him radio production skills, and he produced content for the station during that time. And he came out of that with, this level of confidence and competence that he'd never felt before, and it really showed him what he was capable of, and it gave him confidence, just more in general as well. So yeah, as I mentioned, he now does an hour-long show, The Ozone, on 2XX from 2 till 3 on Sundays with his friend Max. And yeah, it's a great thing. They were off at GammaCon last weekend interviewing people and then playing them on the show. And so that was great. The experience of the radio station internship really showed us how powerful one-on-one mentoring can be for Carl. And initially Jenny was really involved, but again, after a little while, she was able to step back because he just became confident enough to be really autonomous there. Carl had often found it just hard to learn in a classroom, and also, the demands of this kind of external assessments, quite stressful. So it was great to actually just be in a situation when you can learn by doing without, having to meet the requirements of assessment. This experience at the radio station gave him the confidence to start thinking about the future. And, by the time he finished college, he knew that he wanted to stay involved in radio and that he also wanted to be a filmmaker. So he started at CIT at the start of 2006, but he found it quite a big leap from college. And he decided at the end of the first semester to have a gap 6 months. So yeah, which I thought, it scared me a little bit, but I also thought it's an opportunity to try some new things. But also knew that, we needed to do some careful planning, or that time, could end up just being wasted. So so we did start to talk about vision for the future again, and he was now more ready to have those kind of conversations. Even though I wanted him to have authorship of the vision, though, I did end up starting to write some elements of it down because he wasn't ready to lead that process. And I guess at that age, sometimes that kind of thinking probably still feels a bit abstract, or the language, the kind of language that you use, it's not something that they are using a lot themselves. So I think it actually helped to give him some structure to start from. And he liked reading it, and I think for him it was really good to see on paper that my parents have this vision for me that I'll have a job and a career, and I'll go to university, and I'll have valued roles. And then we talked about whether the wording felt right to him, and tweaked some things. And we didn't address everything, but we addressed a few areas of the vision. So we particularly came out with a couple of goals for that gap 6 months, and that was that he continued to build his filmmaking skills, and also that he wanted to get a job. So so we decided that we'd try and find another Jenny, but in the filmmaking area. And we were really fortunate that we came across Daniel, who's a local filmmaker and film producer, and he has a small film production company and does some teaching at University of Canberra, and he's also taught at CIT in the past. We soon realised, he was the right kind of person for the role, and they've been working together since August last year. At the moment, they're in the middle of a very ambitious 16-minute Lego stop frame animation project that's been sort of driven from Carl's initial ideas for a concept, and they're taking it through really from start development to completion in the same kind of way that people would in the film industry. So it's really quite a laborious process, and as I said, they're about halfway through, and Carl's been learning an enormous amount as a result, and he's really shown that he can persist through some really grinding, repetitive tasks, as well as doing the fun stuff. So, he's starting to show some of those qualities that, are part of being a professional. So once this project is completed, Daniel will be getting Carl a bit more involved in his client work, so he'll be getting more real on-the-job experience. And so learning alongside Daniel has been fantastic for Carl, but it's really important in the film and media industries to have some recognised qualifications. So we spoke to Daniel about this, and we all decided it was a good idea for Carl to return to CIT, and so he's doing a combination of the two now. And I think there's also those benefits to learning alongside other people. That's another thing he gets from CIT, and we've now sort of developed quite a good relationship with the staff there, and they've been really supportive of Carl, and I know they really want him to succeed in the course. He's still finding it stressful, but he's gone back with a whole lot of confidence because he knows all this stuff now. He's done so much actual media stuff. There are a few things that are real challenges at CIT in terms of being a student with autism. One of the things is there's a subject called outside broadcast, and some of the competencies are taught that way. But it's in that class they actually film the CIT music students performing. So there's a lot of bands, a lot of noise, and Carl, a few people on the autism spectrum is very sensitive to sound. So that's just going to be literally really painful for him to be in that environment. But we've actually we've talked to CIT, and Carl's going to be actually able to get those same competencies working with Daniel, and then CIT can accredit those. So it's also provided us a way to get around something that would otherwise be a barrier. So that's working really well. So yes, we didn't really get around to focusing on the area of employment during the gap 6 months. To be honest, we really weren't sure exactly how to go about it. But Carl sent some letters for some jobs and things like that, but we didn't really hone in on a strategy. But a job has actually come his way as a result of pursuing his interest in film and radio. So Carl spoke at the Imagine More conference last year, and one of the people who heard him speak asked if he would like to teach her son some media skills, and he was wanting to make a YouTube channel. So they didn't get started on that till about February this year, and it was just going to be an hour a week. But as this boy's mum got to know Carl better, she actually came to offer him a job working 10 hours a week, assisting her with her website. So he does sort of data entry, getting listings up on the website, but it also involves a bit of research to find these listings. It's a global travel site. So, that's bringing with it a whole lot of new thinking for him, around, saving and what to do with money. And, he's really fortunate. He's got a very good boss, And it's such a great thing for your self-esteem to have that first job, and it's also maybe something that, again, we can use that as another way to develop his capacities. And so I think it's also an example of how sometimes when you work on one area of a vision, it can actually have benefits related to other parts of your vision. So, so this is our slightly more detailed vision that we just actually recently added a few more bits to it. That photo is Carl and Jenny, his radio trainer, in the studio. And so our conversations around the vision actually led to some really important insights, as Karen found, talking with Cameron about his vision. And one of them was a really important insight about where Carl feels his autism sits with his identity. So, some people on the autism spectrum, they see their autism as a really integral part of their identity and see themselves as quite different, distinct from neurotypical people. And they have developed very supportive communities, based around that identity. But we realised, that's not the way Carl thinks about his autism. So, as you see from that first paragraph, he sees that as sort of secondary to, his, or a secondary part of his identity. So, he wants to relate to people primarily through shared values and interests. That tells us that, autistic pride type groups and activities are probably, not something for him. And interestingly, he was recently described as an autistic filmmaker, and it was, done in a very well-intentioned way. And Carl's certainly not ashamed about having autism, but he doesn't want to be defined by that diagnosis. And, he really just wants to be known as a filmmaker first and foremost. So, the key messages I want to, I hope you picked up from the presentation is that it's never too late to develop a vision. You don't have to do it in a hurry. You can take years, as we did. And even if you can only see your way to developing part of a vision, it can still be a catalyst for significant changes in the life of your young person. So, thank you.